This week on the show, we are going to do a part two of last week's podcast. In making that show and getting through it, I realized that I missed quite a few things that I think would be very much desired in another party in the United States, another political party. So, with that being said, today we're going to be talking about some more failures that I think both parties are to be held accountable for, as well as some things that I think we should look for in order to get our country back on track to being a world leading nation. I'm your host, Sal Asante. This is the We the Patriots podcast. So, let's get right into it. So, like I said, last week we had a little bit of a rundown of what I think would be required in a new party, went over some of the things that we missed. There were a couple other things that I missed, one being that President Trump sat down with President Putin for the first time in years. He actually came, I believe, the Russian president came to the United States for the first time in about 12 years. So good on Trump for having those talks. It doesn't seem like it necessarily got anywhere structurally so impactfully. So we'll see what comes out with that. Another thing that we did not get to really discuss, or I didn't get to discuss with you, was the truck driver incident in Florida. Now, that incident's going to tie into something that I think I will talk about a little bit later. So I'll go over the details of that. But what I'd like to do is, first of all, keep this not too long of a show this week. And second, like I mentioned in the intro, kind of continue this conversation of what we need to see in a new party in the United States, because this is not a Republican or Democrat issue. This is an issue that we have with the entirety of our leadership class here in the United States of America. One thing that is, I think, universally held as an opinion of Americans in the United States is this ongoing fiasco of the inability to prosecute high crimes, specifically pedophilia, amongst our elites. Now, when I say our elites, obviously there's people who live in the shadows. There's people who have more money than God, and you'll never know their name. Those people are, I would say, indicted in this as well. But the main is our politicians. Everything that happened with the Epstein cover-up scandal has happened on both sides for years. Epstein was not prosecuted. Obviously, he died before he was able to be put to trial. But even furthermore, there are so many different investigations, whether you're talking about the first time that he was arrested, there were such big compilations of data, witness testimony, all of this stuff in order to put this guy away and in order to tie down the leaders that are alleged to have been implicated in the crimes that he committed. And nothing was ever done. He got a lax sentence, and even furthermore, was able to live out a normal life for just about a decade before he was arrested again under the Trump administration. Trump first administration. So I think that when we're talking about a requirement of another party, because I do think that it is a necessity for our country to get its footing back in terms of making another party. That does not mean it's going to happen. I just think it's necessary if we're going to see any improvement of life over here in the United States. I think the first and foremost, there needs to be some prosecution of crimes that have been committed. And this goes all the way up to the top, whether you're talking about something like Bush and the handling of wars in the Middle East, or his absolute fumbling of the care of those in New Orleans and Louisiana generally in Hurricane Katrina, whether you're talking about Obama and his waging of wars in the Middle East as well, or his decimation of the Constitution of the United States, whether you're talking about his crackdown on conservatives using the IRS, or whether you're talking about the healthcare debacle that happened with Obamacare that we still live with today. These are all high crimes that could be, I think, easily prosecuted if somebody actually did not care about who they were angering. Another part of this, of course, would be Trump in his first administration, the absolute debacle, which was COVID. In his second administration, I think there's been plenty examples of him not being willing to be held accountable, whether it's his involvement in the Epstein case, whether it's actually being able to be transparent, whether you're talking about the handling of wars that were supposed to be over, long over by now, that are not, or you're talking about the immigration. You can make a list of things that President Trump should at least be thrown out of office for. And of course, you have President Biden, who let in more illegals than any other president, I believe, ever, if not combined, then definitely singularly let in more people in 4 years than anybody ever had. Yeah, and really took a toll on American culture. So those people will need to be held accountable. And I think the biggest thing is the pedophilia, the stuff that has been alleged about basically every president, starting with Clinton and moving on. And the, again, cover up of the case that has to do with Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein, I think is prosecutable at the highest level. I think that not only should presidents be held accountable, but their cabinets as well. They're all helping out in this. And there's people on both sides, whether you're talking about a little lower on the food chain, congressmen, senators, or whether you're talking about people in the administration, like I said. There is a lot of blame to be thrown around, and they honestly all should be taking the blame. If we cannot have a party that can't hold itself and other leaders accountable due to fears, due to blackmail, or any combination of those, then realistically we don't have true leadership in the country, and I think that that needs to be solved. Now, we're talking about actual accountability. That would be another thing that would be nice. Very rarely are you going to see, especially with a country of our size, talking about the United States, rarely are you going to see someone actually take accountability, say that they were wrong in anything. But at the end of the day, some humility will go a long way to proving that you're not an elitist class and you are human. Because at the end of the day, you're supposed to be. You're supposed to be a government of the people, for the people, by the people. And really recently, honestly, I wouldn't even say recently, for a long time now, it has not seemed that way. And I think it's very important to get to that point. Now, when we're talking about the issue of immigration, I think it's very important take a step back and think about what we want here as a nation. Let's face it, with the birth rates that we have right now, sitting at 1.6 births per woman in the United States, that is not a feasible rate of birth. It's not feasible to continue a nation on that way. We will be losing population if we do not have immigrants coming into the nation at a high enough clip. So we need to solve that issue first and foremost. Anything that Trump was claiming that he wanted to do on the campaign trail, which I think we all knew was not going to be possible to deport as many people as he was claiming he wanted to. But at the end of the day, what needs to be thought of as a leader is, well, we have jobs to fill. We have needs that need to be met here in the nation. And if we're not meeting those needs, we can't just kick people out. We're not going to be able to meet the ends that we need to meet in just economic terms. Forget about anything else. So I think before a true deep dive look at immigration, how to solve the issue, before any of that happens, we need to solve the birth rate problem. And one issue that has come up over really, I guess it was the last presidential debate, so really the last cycle, 2024. One way that both candidates were hoping to promote the birth rate was to give economic stipend, just to give families money for having more children. And honestly, although I think that that could be a part of the solution, I don't think that that's the whole solution, because you need to look at the multitude of issues that people are seeing when they're thinking about creating a family. I myself am very near this age. Within the next 5 to 10 years, I'm going to be contemplating making a family, and I really do want to. That being said, there are some very rational fears. One being economics, and a one-time $5,000 check is not going to really do anything. One-time $5,000 tax refund is not going to really do anything. At the end of the day, you need a lot more than just that in order to make up financial ends that need to be met with having children in this country. I believe the latest study that I saw, and I could be wrong here, it's well over $1 million that you are expected to have to spend on one child to get them from birth to graduating high school. And that's not factoring in college. That's not factoring in other life expenses that are not, food, shelter. There's a lot of money that you need to be willing to part ways with in order to raise a child here in the country. And I think that if you are looking at it as, again, a one-time tax refund, a one-time check, I don't think that that's the correct way to go about it. At the end of the day, raising the birth rates might actually require some action on some other items that might seem unrelated. Whether you're talking about the tax structure as a whole in the United States, I think it does need to be helped. You could think about the total tax that's taken out, whether you talk about income, whether you talk about property taxes, whether you're talking about capital gains, any of this. But I think even deeper, and this is something that I don't think necessarily has a direct cause and effect on the birth rates being low, but I do think it plays a factor, and that's the estate taxes. When you are handing down what you may have spent a lifetime building up, it's already been taxed multiple times, whether you're talking about capital gains, income, combination of the two. And then on top of that, you're going to have to pay a tax if I want to give it to my children. I think that that's a problem. And the fact that many Americans actually see the estate tax as a great thing, or they think that the wealthy should be taxed in that way. Well, in that case, what was the point of building up wealth? In my opinion, it should not go back into the system, or at least not a high percentage of it at all. You should be able to set your children and your children's children up for a successful life. And a lot of that has to do with being a hard worker in your own lifetime and having a system that's set up in order to do so. I think that's a big failure here, and I think that a new party would be very, very well off if they were to consider fixing the tax structure, and not only that, possibly eliminating something like an estate tax, because I don't think that it belongs here. And another thing in combination here, when you're thinking about the birth rates and why they're so important, is the fact that we have such a bad immigration system here in the United States. One being that it takes ages and ages for people that are trying to do things the right way in order to get in here. But I think that's only part of the problem. Another issue is that we have a very high amount of people who came here illegally. Now, you're not able to tackle that problem with as much gusto as maybe President Trump was claiming he wanted to on the campaign trail if you do not have that next generation being born in the United States. If they're just not coming, what are you supposed to do when you have manufacturing jobs, agricultural jobs that need filling? Otherwise, our country doesn't run properly. Well, the answer is you really can't do anything. And I think that that might be part of the reason why we haven't seen more of an aggressive push in terms of deportations or in terms of trying to solve this immigration system. At some point, you need to say we really need people. And that kind of brings me to another point on immigration that I think is really going to have to be another party. The Republicans have taken the stance that they are anti-immigration, which I don't think they even have, but definitely anti-illegal immigration, and that's a good thing. But they're not promoting good immigration, whereas the Democrats right now are promoting mass immigration, and they don't really care if it's illegal or legal. I think a solution needs to be an actually entirely different mode of thinking, and that's the fact that we need to get back to some sort of a values and criteria being met by our incoming immigrants. You know, bringing in people, even if they are going to economically satisfy certain benchmarks that you might need as an immigrant, they may not be satisfying one very crucial aspect of being an immigrant, and that's being able to fit into the nation, being able to assimilate properly. And if that's the case, you'll be bringing in people that could be disrupting either your criminal system, having a mass inflow of people in there when they shouldn't even be in the nation, or you could have people that just don't really get along with Americans that are already living in the country. And if that's the case, I'm of the opinion that people should not even really be brought here, even again, if they're meeting the economic criteria that they need to. And this is one thing that Donald Trump seems to not really care about. You heard him floating the, $1 million gold ticket to come here. Thinking like that gets you people in the nation that don't really have any sort of value alignment, or there's a very good chance that they don't have value alignment, and just people who have money. At the end of the day, bringing in people like that actually really it makes a mockery of the lower class in the United States. Many people in our country that are born here, families have been born here, wouldn't be able to afford that golden ticket, and yet you're willing to bring in people from other nations that have no value alignment whatsoever with the nation and bring them in just because they can afford it. That to me is a very bad way to solve an immigration problem. And at the end of the day, those types of people are not going to be holding the jobs that many people look to immigrants to fill, whether you're talking about construction, whether you're talking about agriculture, whether you're talking about manufacturing. There's a lot of jobs that at the end of the day are on the lower end of the income spectrum. And if those jobs aren't being filled by Americans, which in my opinion, they really should be, at least as starter jobs, but they're not. And at the end of the day, what we're looking at is high immigrant numbers in those jobs. And an example of that, of course, would be trucking. Now, we had this issue here in Florida, which was really one of the biggest tragedies that I've ever seen. And if you're not aware of the situation, I will briefly outline it because I don't have all the information in front of me, so I forgive you if I get some facts wrong here. But this is an illegal immigrant, I believe based out of India. And this person made an illegal U-turn on a freeway in Florida. He ended up getting stuck in the middle of the highway, causing the accident that fatally killed 3 people, all of which in the same family, and devastating that family, quite frankly. And when it comes down to it, what also ended up coming out is that the individual could not pass any sort of English test, so he could not understand English. And not only that, was unable to perform well enough on a test of road signs to even have received his license in the first place. And this incident in and of itself is the best example that I've seen. At least it's gone viral. I'm sure many other examples exist that at least aren't this gruesome, but it is the best example to date, in my opinion, that proves that these sanctuary states that are giving out licenses, and more specifically, commercial driver's licenses to illegal immigrants, it should be treated on a federal level as law breaking on the state's behalf. At the end of the day, what you have is jobs that, in a lot of cases, actually are sought after by American citizens. High paying commercial driving jobs are, well, they are what they are. They're high paying. Now, they keep you away from home a lot of times more than other jobs. And that's why a lot of times you don't see people staying in that job for a long time. But it could be a good job, a good way of someone getting into a higher income, could be a good way of people getting into the next level of earning money that, you know, could be very good for a lot of Americans. And at the end of the day, what I see, at least here in New Jersey, which is one of those sanctuary states that hands out driver's licenses without actually taking into account whether someone is a citizen or not, you are taking away the jobs of American citizens. And I think that that is a huge issue. And I think that, you know, although this issue specifically about the Florida driver, the Florida commercial driver that killed these people, although this is extremely sad and tragic, at least you can look at it in the minimum. At least it's opening up the eyes of a lot of Americans to seeing that an issue to be had with these sanctuary states. And again, this person, I believe, got their license in California, which is one of those states that gives out licenses, and not just commercial, all types of driver's licenses, but commercial included, and doesn't take into account someone's ability to understand English, doesn't seem to take into account someone's ability to understand road signs, and actually just gives out the license because it's another person filling the boots that they need filled. I think that it's a good way, again, with this gruesome and tragic situation being what it is, I think it's a great time for people to kind of wake up to the fact that these people, I say these people not to group them together, but quite specifically, illegal immigrants should not have these jobs, especially if they are unable to understand English and are not able to comprehend road signs. I think that's kind of obvious, but given that this person was able to drive for so long without having anything brought up, I think that it needs to be said, unfortunately. And I think that it's another thing that it's another example of something that needs to be taken into account if there is another party that should be starting to wield power here in the United States. And I kind of want to speak on behalf of the last 2 points that I've made, both the birth rates, the immigration, and not only that, the ability to prosecute high crimes. At the end of the day, a new party is going to have to be unafraid of the mess that they're about to stir up. And what do I mean by that? Well, we have such a large bureaucracy here in the United States that you are going to make people mad. You are going to make people come after you. You may even have something like an assassination attempt be taken on your life or your leadership's lives or your party's lives because you are angering, in my opinion, the right kind of people, but I guess you could say the wrong people. The new party leadership, if there is a new party, would need to be unafraid in that aspect because, well, let's just be honest, you're taking away power from two very set in stone allegiances, whether you're talking about the Democrats or the Republicans or just the bureaucracy in general. You'll be taking away from them. And one thing that I think is definitely not taken into account enough, it was one of the things that Trump ran on in the first go around and didn't really run too much on in 2020 or 2024. And that is the drain the swamp aspect. And not to steal Trump's wording, but the wording is actually perfect. He just never actually was able to accomplish it. And part of that kind of goes back on what I just said. You're going to be angering a lot of people and a lot of very powerful people. But at the end of the day, the amount of money that gets spent by our federal government in order to keep these people afloat, keep these bureaucracies set in stone and unable to be changed, whether you're talking about the military industrial complex, the unions in the United States, or just all of the federal agencies that exist. You're talking about the DEA, you're talking about the IRS, you're talking about the FDA, you're talking about the CIA, the FBI. Any of these agencies, the alphabet agencies as we'll call them, they all cost millions and millions, if not billions of dollars to keep running every single year. And if at some point I think that our country's going to have to face up to the fact that we just can't afford to keep them afloat anymore. And another thing, of course, I think I touched on it last week, but if I didn't, Social Security. It's a failed system. Just being completely honest, it's a failed system. If anything, if we're going to try to have this aspect of taking a percentage of someone's paycheck in order to save it for them in retirement, it should be invested in the market directly in behalf of the person. Having it go immediately from, for example, my paycheck and going to someone who is now taking Social Security rather than it being in an account is just a failure. It is a Ponzi scheme, and it is something that we have no option. Ponzi scheme is actually something that at some point you had an option to opt in. We don't have an option here in the United States. You are forced to do this, and your employer is forced to pay another half of what is being taken out of your salary in order to make this up. And it is just an absolute failure of a policy, and I think it needs to be changed. All of these, and you can even hear when people start threatening Social Security or Medicare, Medicaid, food stamps, SNAP programs. Any of these issues get even close to being touched by people in power, you hear the silent minority, well, not so silent minority, you hear the minority come out of the woodworks and scream as loud as possible, whether you're talking about news agencies, whether you're talking about protests, whatever way it happens. People get so upset when you come after these, and this new party that I'm alleging may be created or may have to be created, they're going to have to not give a shit. And then you may look at that as a sad thing, but at the end of the day, the math is not going to work out long term. It's already not working out. And somebody's going to have to get angry, and I think that that's going to have to be a part of what this next new party in America is going to have to be, because at this point, the Republicans, Democrats, both are culpable for what's happening. They both overspend. They don't really care about any sort of budgeting. They don't really care about having any sort of pay down on our national debt. They don't care that it goes through the roof. And I can guarantee you within the next 10 years, we're going to be well above $50 million in debt. $50 trillion in debt. I apologize. Big difference there. $50 trillion in debt and have nowhere to go with it. So moving on, the next thing that I think is going to have to be heavily promoted by this new party. This is something that I don't have a ton to speak on, but I think that is very important, and that is it's going to have to be a large promoter of faith. You notice I don't know so much about the Bush because I didn't live through the Bush administration, but I'll do the ones that I lived through, and that would be the Obama administration, Trump 1 and Trump 2, and Biden. Under every single administration, faith has played a back role. Even, for an example, Donald Trump not putting his hand on the Bible and swearing his oath in his second term. That's just an example, but the actual promotion of faith, and I know that we had Jackson on a couple of weeks ago, maybe even a month ago now at this point, explaining how Trump has the White House faith office, but at the end of the day, it's not enough. And why is it not enough? Because it's not outward. It's not out in the news. There's no talk of promoting God, the Lord, anything. I've spoken about it on this show before. We are a nation of Christians, Christian values, and Christian makeup, not acknowledging that, not utilizing that in order to make decisions or whether to have sound decision making or poor decision making. I think a lot of it comes back to the fact that our leadership does not involve any sort of religion, and they try to disallow it. They so wholeheartedly believe that the separation of church and state is required when it comes to decision making. And at the end of the day, the whole point of separation of church and state is to say that we do not want a faith-led movement to take over the government. We do not want a theocracy. Well, it's very different to have a theocracy and have someone who actually believes in God and God's wrath making decisions. And that second option that I brought up would be a fantastic thing if we actually had it, but we do not. And I think that the new party would have to really kind of stir up the pot a little bit in terms of getting young people back out into churches, into mosques, into temples, into anything that is taking into account God's word and the ability to have God in the back of your mind when decision making. Because at the end of the day, someone who is fearful of God and fearful of repercussions either now or after we all pass on would be someone, in my opinion, that is going to be a better decision maker when thinking about, what is best for the country. If I am a leader, I am beholden to this, and that. We don't see that. And I think that it's going to have to be heavily promoted by the party that comes up. Republicans weaponize faith and especially Christianity all the time. Democrats, in a lot of cases, they kind of point at Republican flaws in their decision making, mocking the fact that they may be Christian, Catholic, a Jewish person, whoever, mocking the fact that they're not living up to their own values and this and that and the other. But at the end of the day, neither side is utilizing any sort of wisdom taken from the Bible, from any faith driven book or God in general. None of them are utilizing that in a sense of making very important decisions. And I think that that is a failure on our leadership class. And I think that's definitely going to have to change looking ahead to another party that may be created here in the United States. And now, lastly, I'm kind of going back on something that I already spoke about, but I think that this is very important to bring up: the inability of the United States to hold our allies accountable for things that either they do wrong or shortcomings that they have that hurt the United States. It really hurts our image and it hurts our ability to actually conduct negotiations. You know, having an inability to face up, biggest example right now that comes to my mind, and I think comes to a lot of our minds, is we're not holding Israel accountable for any of their wrongdoings out in the war with Hamas, or the war that they're calling with Hamas, but I think it is more accurately termed as the war against the Palestinian people and the people of Gaza. At the end of the day, they really damn close to committing what a lot of people would call a genocide. And I think most people would agree that they're most definitely going through an ethnic cleansing right now. And we are not holding them accountable. If anything, we have a lot of our leadership and a lot of people in power really cheering on their actions and having no issue with what they're doing, taking the Israeli talking points word for word, and if not, just regurgitating them. And it's sickening. It's sickening to me. It's sickening to a lot of Americans because we all see the destruction, we all see the devastation, and none of our leadership seems to care, nor do they want to point it out. And I think holding these people accountable, holding, the Israelis who are supposed to be, and I'm not talking about the Israeli people, the Israeli government, holding these people accountable that are supposed to be our best allies, or holding the EU accountable when they really just talk a big game and don't really do anything substantial about the invading Russia on Ukraine. You could talk about tons and tons of issues, especially over a long time. What it comes down to is that we really do not stand up to our allies when they're doing something wrong. And if anything, in a lot of cases, we actually promote their wrongdoing. And I think that that is so, so terrible for what could be a really great nation. And at the end of the day, in a lot of cases, we emulate their shortcomings and their wrongdoings. Whether you're talking about our prosecuting of wars in the Middle East, basically follows the English model that went on in the early 20th century, late 18th century. We copy a lot of our really, really bad policy, especially foreign policy, from our allies that at the end of the day don't really show that they are our allies. And I think it's really important to separate ourselves, hold ourselves to a higher standard as Americans, and get back to a place where we are the leadership and we are showing as a shining example how to act on the world stage. But it's really hard to do that when you have pretty sad examples of what we want to go on overseas, whether you're talking about our Middle East policy, our constant fighting with Russia, even after they dismantled their Communist Party. We're talking about our trade wars that have been going on under the Trump presidency for the past really like 12 years, minus a little bit of Biden in the middle. This stuff, it needs to be done better. It needs to be held again to a higher standard, and we need to set forth a standard that should be looked at the rest of the world in envy. We don't set that example. Everybody else is doing their own thing and honestly doing it quite terribly. And I think a part of that is because American leadership is not giving anything to look up at. So, in the end, what I think is really important is that I think that we need a new party. This issue of that I just mentioned of holding our allies accountable in foreign policy in general is not a right issue or a left issue. It is the entire American leadership. And a lot of it kind of goes back to that bureaucracy thing that really needs to be stamped down. Whether you're talking about that, the immigration issues that we talked about today, inability for our country to keep up with its birth rate, or whether you're talking about just high crimes being committed by people and none of it really mattering, nobody really caring what our elites do. This is all a recipe for a crumbling nation. And I really do believe, and you can let me know what you think in the comments, but I really do believe that the solution here is that we need a party that actually cares about America, puts America first rather than putting it on the back burner for other issues, issues that don't actually affect us everyday Americans, or really just allowing our allies to take all of our money and misspend it. So that's all I got for you guys today. I hope you guys enjoyed. We will be back next week with another show. Not sure what direction I'm going to go. I don't think I'm going to be covering the news too much. I really want to be talking more like I did these last couple of weeks about our American culture, the way that America, broadly speaking, in politics is going. And, following the news week to week kind of gets boring after a while. So I think I'm going to stick with this model that I got going on. Let me know what you think. Let me know what you want to see down below. Other than that, I will catch you guys next week.
I were the fucking
Peace
state.
out.
I wanna be something, not nothing. Trapped inside my dream and I'm running away from these demons. But the feeling's so good, I'ma keep dreaming.